We are going to have the history of the Bushnell told in 10 minutes through the life and times of Maxwell Belding. We call it Bushnell History a la Max. And for our particular purposes today, the Bushnell history starts in 1922. This was a momentous time. And in Rockville, the big news was that Helen Maxwell and Frederick Norton Belding had just had this marvelous baby boy. And you know, I don't know about you, but one of my first impressions about Max was he was a terrific dresser. And he probably didn't come into this world fully clothed. I suspect he didn't. But it makes a lot of sense that he was born into a textile family. And in fact, his grandfather, Alpha, was known as the grand old man of the silk industry. And his dad headed up the Belding Hemingway Mills. And his grandmother, his father, headed up the Hockney Mills, and so it made a little sense. Now, in 1922, it was a momentous time, and just some of the things that surrounded Max in his birth year. For example, you had the whole nation, not only the textile industry, bursting with new ideas and industry. Walt Disney, in this year, your birth year, Max, started a not too promising sounding film company called Laugh-O-Gram. The Eskimo pie was introduced in Iowa, of all places, by Christian Nelson. Reader's Digest came out with its first issue in the month you were born. A young Connecticut playwright, Eugene O'Neill, won the Pulitzer Prize for Anna Christie. We had President Harding doing the first radio broadcast as a president at Baltimore's memorial ceremonies for the Francis Scott Key Memorial. We had Albert Einstein winning the Nobel Prize, and the first woman senator from Georgia, Rebecca Felton, was put into the Senate. For sports fans, now I know probably Max grew up loving tennis, and at this point, Bill Tilden was the first superstar of tennis. He won everything in sight. And in baseball, we had the Yankees constructing their stadium in the Bronx in 1922 and bringing on board, always to the chagrin of us Bo Sox fans, Babe Ruth for the astounding salary of $52,000. The American football pros became the NFL in that year. Now, around 1922, mothers like Helen were worried. It was the Roaring '20s. And Dotha, our benefactress, right down here on the corner, was also worried. Why was she worried? She was worried because it was the Roaring '20s. There were the flappers, there were the speakeasiers, the hooch, and most of all, as the head of the Newsboys and Newsgirls Committee of the Hartford Consumer League, she was worried about the protection of the kids that delivered the newspapers, because on Main Street there were theaters and burlesque halls with raucous comedians and scantily clad choreens, and they were a danger to the youth. Now, between that concern and that's the Parsons. That was the worst. That and the Strand. And between that concern and the desire to memorialize her father that had been one of the great men of the 19th century and possibly Hartford's greatest citizen, she, 3 years before you were born, Max, chartered this. And that was to establish a center for the benefit of public and educational and cultural activities right where we sit today. Now, while Max was busy learning to crawl and to walk and to talk, Dotha and her family were very busy. They had hired architects from New York who later designed Radio City Music Hall. They were on the move, just getting this place ready for Max. And in 1928, as Bob Patricelli said, the cornerstone was laid, construction began in the midst of the Depressions, and in 1930, a cultural era dawned. And one of the letters, and I got to tell you, there are files things. And one of the things he said, which I loved, was, I think that there was a Hartford before the Bushnell, but I can't imagine. And in fact, in 1930, a new cultural era did dawn, and to it, so many flocked. This became the place, and as I love to recall, people came to this theater. They came on the trolley lines that ran in front of it, they came in their new automobiles, and they walked in top hat and tails from the fashionable neighborhoods of West Hartford, Asylum Hill. And all through the decade that followed, as Max was growing up as probably a problematic adolescent, this became a classical wonderland. We had all of the greats, anybody that was anybody, Leopold Stokowski in classical music. The Metropolitan made the Bushnell one of its 4 stops in America where they brought great opera. The great touring companies of the day, including the Bolshoi and others, came here. And Helen Hayes, the First Lady of Theater, sold out Victoria Regina in a record 4 hours. Now, this was one of the great theaters. Leopold Stokowski called it the most beautiful, the most acoustically and modern theater in the world. And all of this innovation of the Times and of the Bushnell is clarioned in our ceiling mural, the largest in America. And you'll see the icons. You'll see Al Jolson and a camera. The talkies were the latest innovation when this theater was opened in 1928. And then if you look more closely, you'll see other icons of progress. You'll see skyscrapers, the Empire State Building and the Chrysler Building were being built at the same time. And then there were these wondrous machines, airplanes. Charles Lindbergh had just crossed the Atlantic and become a national hero the year before. Flight became intoxicating to all people, most of all, the 14-year-old Max Belding. Max Belding, when he was 14 years old, with his dad and with his good friend James Rockefeller, took a ride on the Hindenburg. And these tickets are buried in our Cornerstone for the new building that we asked people to do. It was August of 1936. Max describes the voyage can be one only described in superlatives. 72 passengers in all. We retreated to the quietest, most spacious, absolutely motionless ride imaginable at a speed of 80 miles per hour at an altitude between 500 and 1,500 feet over the icebergs of the North Atlantic. This was big news, and his father sent a radiogram which was covered in the papers, and this is the really interesting part. That was a pretty fabulous experience, and Max wrote a paper about it, and he comments on this in his writings in the Hall's papers. He says, the illusory aspect of the adventure was further impressed on me when assigned by our English teacher to write about something from our summertime leisure. To my disappointment, my essay on lighter-than-air travel received a mark of only C+, with a notation from our teacher that it was a good paper and would have been worth an A if the story had been true, and not just an exercise of imagination. Well, you know, I always say goodness prevails, and that C+ did not slow down young Max. He went on to St. Paul's and Yale, so that was justice served. And this is a piece of Yale as it looked when he was there. And 117 years before that, Horace Bushnell himself had started here. This is what Yale looked like, and I suspect this is what Max looked like. The natty Max, always dressed, top hat, tails, Panama hat, raccoon coat, and probably a little flask carrying Hugh Blind liquors in that coat. Am I right, Max? He was at Yale studying, he was perfecting his golf and tennis skills, but as you've come to find out, one of his secret passions developed there, the organ. He learned how to play and studied the organ at Yale. It is one of the reasons that I suspect that Yale has a fellowship named in Max's honor to promote doctorate study in music, and certainly the reason that led him to the restoration of the great Austin organ here called Basil's Baby. It was the favorite organ of founder Basil Austin of the Austin Organ Company. Here you see the great Virgil Fox at the keyboard. As Max left Yale, he went on to fight for his country, becoming a lieutenant. And here at the Bushnell, we spread our wings as a community venue during those war years. We had Navy war relief efforts. Here you see Bill Mortensen with Franco H. Williams. I know one of the favorites of the Yale men in this audience. We also had many rallies for the Salvation Army. Here is Evangeline Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army. We famously had Marian Anderson, who Bill Mortensen invited here when she was denied access to Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. And then Max got out of the Navy, became a businessman, and got involved in civic activities. And the Bushnell's lucky day came in 1959 when he accepted trusteeship. And I'm going to show you a look of how natty and handsome he was then.
I don't know where an interest like this can start. I have a suspicion that it starts at a very early age. Now, we had a particularly, I think, a fine arts program in the Rockville Public High School. We absorbed a certain amount of that, whether we knew it or not at the time. Maybe the first formal instance I got of committing to the art world at all was coming out of the Navy. I was at a gathering and I was approached by the lieutenant governor's wife. She said, we've got to raise some money for the symphony. We'd like you to be chairman of this drive. I said, well, I never have headed up a campaign or drive. I know next to nothing about it. Well, you know, they always say, it's going to be easy, we'll give you a couple of hundred volunteers, and they'll do all the work. You don't have to know anything. Once you get involved in something all the way that way, you become kind of a believer.
And a believer he became. He worked shoulder to shoulder with Ap Severance, who became a friend, who had become president in 1956. He became a friend to an eventual mentor, Bill Mortensen, and together they created a Bushnell that was for the modern 20th century, not only featuring the great classical arts, but respecting the change of demographics and the broadening community. As Max said in one of his many letters, arts and community will always change. We at the Bushnell, too, will change. And change they did, bringing Broadway, which became a mainstay of the hall, popular entertainments, and modern dance, and all manner of entertainment. So much entertainment that by 1999, we were bursting at the seams, and it was determined that we would take on the first historic edition of the hall. And this was not taken lightly. It was a major step. And here you'll hear of the plans. You'll recognize the voices.
With the aid of our architects, we will take a walkthrough of where we are with respect to our proposed new facilities in order that we may authorize final drawings to be made and go all the way to the bid stage in preparation for construction.
The new building has been designed, deliberately making a statement that this is a new building. It is being built at the end of the 20th century, at the beginning of the 21st, and it should look like it is respectful and a part of the composition, but definitely new.
This is a major commitment towards culture in this entire region.
And upon its completion and dedication, the new theater will forever be known as the Maxwell and Ruth Belding Theater.
And the applause have not stopped. This is a hall that has been embraced by this community and applauded by artists and audiences alike for its beauty of the exterior, for its magnificent interior. They love those spacious seats. Through this hall, we've been able to advance our mission in arts, education, and community absolutely beautifully. It has served as a research and development lab for us. Here we have another textile theme, The Overcoat, a marvelous, marvelous play that we did in concert with Canadian Stage. We've been able to attract the city's young professionals and provide them entertainments, comedies like Second City and Capitol Steps, and increasingly provide wholesome entertainment for families, which I think Dotha would be so very happy. We've also been able to expand our education efforts and dig deeper into our partners' mission. Just this past year, the superintendent of schools, and I don't even know if you know this, Max, has asked us to consider a charter school based on partners' methodologies. And we have decided to develop local talent, and this is the Ensign Darling Vocal Fellowship, which attracts the best vocal talent in Connecticut. We also remain dedicated and can do so much in the Belding for our community purposes. Just last week, we had what Tom Foley called a brawl at the Bushnell. The debates were held here. We have had the Governor's Arts Awards. We have had just all manner of convocation. The Shanghai trade delegation came here. We had performances, and they brought with them Confucius, which sits on our west lawn, the largest sculpture ever given to anybody by the government of China sits on our lawn. And it was at the Belding that was conferred. And we've had all manner of parties. We've had the Hartford Hospital galas, all types of charities. We've had our own Ovations, which is such an important gala for our education department every year. And almost amazingly, it is our 10th anniversary. I don't know where this decade went, but it has been a fabulous decade. And as McDonald says, we have served over 900,000 people in that theater. And we owe it all to you, Max Belding, your splendid family. And isn't that a lovely picture? I just love that. And I just want to say, Max, it has been this young girl's great pleasure to work, with you. You are one of the greatest human beings I've ever met. Thank you.